can I have our speakers up on stage? Divina Mehra, founder and CMD of First Global. She built First Global into a large asset management firm using AI-powered investing. A gold medalist from IIM Ahmedabad, she has cemented her place amongst Fortune's 50 most powerful women in business. Ladies and gentlemen, can we hear an applause for our panelist? The interlocutor with her is Shrutajit KK, executive editor of Economic Times, the newspaper. Over to you both, please.
Yeah, normally they're sitting like this. Maybe that's the reason.
There are literature festivals held in plains. There are literature festivals that I've seen by the beach. But after coming here, I'm convinced that hills are the best setting to talk about books. And indeed, a festival that's in the name of the great Khushwant Singh was given me as a reader endless hours of joy. It's marvelous to be here. Thank you all. And we're going to talk today about a book that Devina has written. Devina, for those of you who are familiar with markets in the financial sector, will need not a lot of introduction. She's one of the stalwarts of India's financial markets and also a pioneer as a woman equity researcher, stockbroker, and investor, starting in the early days of when they opened up, when BSE opened up membership to professionals and so on. So this book, what she has done is, what I found quite marvelous about the book is that it's equally rewarding for somebody who's really new to markets. It's a great book for beginners. With some interest. I mean, it's not a pop book. It's a serious book, but it can also be rewarding for people with a reasonable amount of knowledge. It works as a really good primer on a lot of mental models, cognitive biases, the history of markets, and all of that. Altogether, a wonderful read, which I look forward to diving into with you, Devina, in a moment. But I want to start off by asking you about your own journey. When you started in the markets, what was it like when you started, to get a head start, and how did you get into all of this, firstly?
Yeah, I mean, it was an unusual starting point. I grew up in Lucknow, and both my parents have been professors, so very, very far away from markets or even business. So because my father and mother had no interest in money whatsoever. I landed up at IIM Ahmedabad at age 19, so I was youngest in my batch. I had no idea what a share was. I had no idea what debit and credit were. And those were very fascinating 2 years learning everything. And when I graduated, there was nothing called equity research. There was no career called equity research. We didn't even have a course on it. So I joined a bank, at that time Citibank. I spent about 7 years there in investment banking and then in corporate credit. And there were two factors. I mean, I was anyway not extremely happy in the job, but besides that, there were two factors which kind of triggered my journey into business over 3 decades now. One was Dr. Manmohan Singh's liberalization budget, where he said that he would open the market to foreign institutional investors. I said, now the market will professionalize. Now there will be a market for professional research. That was one. And the other was NSE was not around at that time. SEBI was not around. The biggest exchange was Bombay Stock Exchange. And they said they would give 71 new memberships to professionals. It's a long story, so I won't go into that. But it was like there. People said, don't even apply. They will give it to apne bhai bhatijon ko, and you are not a Gujarati or not a Marwadi, which was about 100% of the BSE brokers. They are not going to give it to you, and plus you're a woman. But I got it. The last 2 marks I got because of my IIM gold medal, so you don't know where the dots connect in hindsight. And that was the beginning. In the beginning, I was on the stockbroking and investment banking side, servicing some of the largest funds in the world. And after about almost a decade of doing that, I took the company global, which again was ours was not just the first Indian, we were the first Asian members of the London Stock Exchange back in 1999. Other than the Japanese, nobody in Asia had gone west. And then the next year of the NASD, which is the US broking license. And so that was a very rewarding journey. And then, of course, we moved from stockbroking to asset management about 10 years back. So that's been the whole journey in a nutshell.
And what led you to write this book?
It is really a distillation of all that I have learned. And for me, learning is very key. If I look back on my life, what gives me the most joy is learning. And that's the fun part of this profession, that 30 years on, you're still learning. There's no day when you will know it all. So I wanted to, and I've realized that if you think from first principles, a lot of things that are held as truths in the market are not true. So I wanted to convey that, and there's, like with learning, it comes that, okay, you get this insight, let me explain it to people. And maybe it's the teaching genes of my parents that I want to explain. And this is an attempt to do that. And yes, I have tried to make it accessible to even people without a background in market. So it has highlights, it has summaries, and most chapters have a QR code at the end, which if you scan, it will take you to a 2 or 4 minute video, which will explain the same thing. So like a school friend of mine was saying, कि chapter का revision हो जाता है. So I've tried to make it accessible to people, but yes, it has insights which people who have been veterans in the market also said that we have not looked at this aspect, or we have not thought of it this way. So that it is meant to span all of that.
Wonderful. Personal finance, or managing one's own money, and how to save, invest, save for retirement, make sure you have a good financial life. At one level, it's simple enough. I mean, this whole question around money. I mean, you want to save as much as possible. You want to invest, in reasonably sustainable ways, and then you don't want to be profligate with the spending. But on the other hand, it also involves a lot of counterintuitive things. Compounding of money itself is not, easily. It's not an intuitive thing.
Right.
Some of the concepts you explain here, again, are so. It's simultaneous. I mean, what should be quite a simple thing, however, is actually quite complex now, with all the various pathways available to you. But I want to start by, what I found quite useful in the book is the basic financial mantras that anybody can access. Can we start by discussing these? What are these 4 basic financial mantras?
Okay, so you're right. I mean, in one of my recent columns in Mint, I had written that investing is neither as simple nor as complex as people want it to be. So do not try to optimize or maximize your returns. Do the boring stuff, do it right, and over a period of time, that is all that you need to do. That will take you to 80 to 90% of the optimization, and do not use investing for entertainment. So it is not like अगर यही boring चीजें करते रहेंगे तो अगले cocktail party में क्या बात करेंगे कि कौन सा stock निकाला था. तो don't get into that. So don't play fast and loose with your money. This is Diwali time, so I always say that don't just worship Lakshmi Ma. Pay attention to what you're doing. I mean, you're buying a mobile phone, you do a lot of research. You buy a stock, friend में किसी ने party में बोल दिया, कोई telegram group में आ गया, कोई चलते चलते TV पे कुछ सुन लिया. So don't do stuff like that. That's the whole point, that you should do things which are sustainable. So that's the 4 mantras in the book. First is, of course, asset allocation, which sounds fancy for people not from the profession, but it is actually quite simple. So it's categories of assets. What is equity? Anything you are buying directly as stock, or you are buying equity mutual fund or equity PMS, all of that is equity. So that's one bucket. Then there is a bucket of fixed income, which is bank fixed deposits or tax saving schemes, right up to equity mutual funds. Then there is real estate. There's gold. There might be something else, crypto or art or something like that. So first, as I say, even in Google Maps, you don't just put the destination, you have to put the starting point. So first you take a whole look at where you are invested currently, and you might be surprised once you add up the numbers that it is very different from what you thought it was. And on the other side, of course, are any outstanding loans on housing, car, etc. And then you deliberately make a decision to do an asset allocation. You should, for example, even though equities is most of my bread and butter, I would say never have 100% in equity, not even if you are 25 and in a good job, because equity has to be money you do not need to touch under any circumstances for at least 8 to 10 years. So, and also on the other hand, even at retirement time, it should not be that you have 0% in equity, because longevity has increased. People are, so you have to budget for maybe at least 30 years after retirement. I mean, my mother has been a pensioner longer than she worked. She worked for about 30 years. She's been a pensioner for longer than that. So that is the whole point, that do this. So asset allocation, deliberate asset allocation is one. Look at how your portfolio is currently. Risk management is key. They said risk management is the mantra you have to live by. So if you're looking at, for example, your stock portfolio, always have stop losses, always have, look at that you're not very concentrated in only a few industries. So even if you hold 30 stocks, if they are only in 3 industries, if you only have, let's say, banks, you have consumer good companies and one other category, it's almost like being invested in 3 stocks, because typically stocks in an industry move together. So do the basics right. And one thing which Indians very often miss out on is global investing. So it's a cause for me that diversification doesn't mean just diversification within India. You have to look at the global investment scenario. And on that, हमारी दादी नानी गलत नहीं थी सोना खरीदने में, because at that time you could not invest anywhere in the world. There was no capital account convertibility. I mean, the crowd here is old enough to remember a time when you could take out only $500 when traveling, and that too once in 3 years. Other times, if you were traveling, you could take only $20. But now, the liberalized remittance scheme is very generous. You can send $250,000 per person per year. So a family of 4 can send $1 million. That's almost 9 crore rupees. So basically you can send more or less as much as you want. So you have to look at that seriously, and global doesn't mean only the US. So because it's a cause for me, for example, we have an investment product which invests all across the globe that starts at $10,000. I mean, normally you will not get it for less than $1 million. So that's and that was how, I mean, we went global in the first place, that, oh, don't put all your eggs in one basket. And one data point, when I started working, the dollar was 12 rupees. So in the course of less than a career, it's 90% down. So if when you're planning for goals 10, 20, 30 years ago, later, you can't let go of that fact. So these are the 4 things: asset allocation, looking at your portfolio as a whole, risk management, and global diversification.
I want to double click into the third one, risk management.
Right.
And in the course of it, I would like to pose a question to the audience, which is, if the price of an asset, security, an index, anything, falls by 80%, by how much would it have to go back up to get to the same level that it fell from? Anybody? Sorry? 120. Any other guesses? Somebody said 400.
Yes. Yes.
400. That's closer to 5 times it is. 500%.
5 times. So, I mean, if you look at how much it has to go up by, he's right, it's 400%. So it has to become 5 times. So percentages are not symmetrical. This is basic, class 4 level arithmetic, but people forget it, that if something falls 50%, it has to double to come to 0. If something falls by 1/3, it has to go up by 50% to get to 0. And how this links to risk management is this, that you have to prevent very big hits to your portfolio. So it doesn't mean that you don't book losses. In fact, you have to book the small losses so that you don't have the big loss on your portfolio. As a portfolio as a whole doesn't take a big hit. And of course, I mean, we also use hedging as a professional, in professional fund management, etc., in our PMS. But even at the basic level, as I said, don't have too much of concentration and have stop losses, what is called trailing stop losses. So how that works, I've explained. I don't want to get into that just now. And the best thing you can do for your portfolio, whatever you're managing yourself, is when you are investing, tell yourself that I may be making a mistake. Because I can tell you, every investor, every famous investor you've heard of, every famous fund manager you have heard of, significant portion of where they invest is going to be a mistake, where you need to get out. Because you don't know the future. Investing is a game of skill and luck. So the luck, it's a game of probability. It's not a game of certainty. You don't know what happens 6 months later, 1 year later. And I always say, having lived through 2020, if you don't realize that, not only that you could not have seen the COVID coming, but if I had told you that such a thing will come, which will upend the world where hotels, aviation, autos, retail, a whole lot of industries will come to zero, could anybody have predicted that the markets in India and globally would zoom? So it is, always remember, there's uncertainty in life. Only thing which is a game of skill alone is chess. Every other game in life is a game of luck and skill. So risk management is paramount.
Yeah, speaking of, I mean, COVID could qualify for what Taleb calls a black swan event. And I think when we have a president in the Oval Office like President Trump, you can be guaranteed a black swan event almost every week, isn't it? Now he has gone after China. So are these, I mean, do you see these are more volatile than normal times? Would you say that?
I mean, Trump is definitely changing a lot of the world order which has existed since World War II. So, and you don't know what is replacing that. So if what he's saying continues, I mean, right from saying that, basically acting like a hafta vasuli don, that, if you want protection, how much are you willing to pay to allies? I mean, he's not talking of, the people on the other side like China, which you can, like Europe and Japan, he's telling them all these things. And sometimes in interviews, people ask me, what do you think Trump will do? I said, does he even know what he's going to do next week that I should be able to predict it? But markets are different things. What is damaging, I think, is the long-term positioning of US, because US had a very particular positioning. It was not just a rich nation. It had this aura, rightfully or wrongfully, I mean, I think partly wrongfully, of having very strong institutions, very good rule of law, which it didn't have actually, and freedoms of speech and so on. And that was the magnet that drew literally the best and brightest from around the world. Other rich countries did not draw that kind of talent from around the world. And he's damaging that. And that will have a long-term impact. Already many Western European nations are telling researchers in the US, kind of blank check, come and set up your whole whatever it is, lab or whatever here. So that will have a long-term impact on US, I think, unless, and who knows if he goes in 4 years or he doesn't go 4 years. वैसे एक बात है that one of the stand-up comedians said कि बाकी जो भी हो 4 साल रौनक लगी रहेगी. So I think वो तो वो कर रहा है. That is.
One of the reasons I respect.
But okay, one more thing on, you said whether it's unusually volatile. You can't really say that. I mean, the world has seen the Cold War. It has seen things coming close to nuclear bombs, all that. So there have been many phases. So ultimately, the mantra in life is that this too shall pass. So nothing lasts forever. Nothing is the end of the world. Unless it's really the end of the world, in which case it doesn't matter. In
which case it doesn't matter how much money is left in your portfolio. That's correct. No, so one of the reasons I respect Devina is that in her writings, unlike most people who manage money, who tend to be quite bullish about the dreams that they show you, right? That ये पैसा यहाँ से इतना हो सकता है आप जब तक retire होगा. Devina is very realistic about what happens over a long term, and in her writings, she always talks about, so much of it is about timing. You can have a 10-year period in equity markets where the returns are super flat, so it's not as if And I'm always wary of these super optimistic projections. And one such, which has gone really, really viral a few years ago, was Ramesh Damani, who's quite an astute investor himself and has written the foreword of your book, quite a nice foreword. But Ramesh says in this viral video that in 30 years you can turn 10 lakh rupees into 100 crores. Quite naturally, it's a mind-boggling claim. So anybody so all these young people, on this YouTube video comments, they're all going wild. So this obviously means that, instead of the idea that typically you can double money in 5 years or so, he's saying that it'll need 10 doublings over the course of 30 years, and therefore every 3 years your money would have to double and so on. Is this a realistic scenario?
I don't think so, because when there's euphoria in the market, as was there in the first 8-9 months of 2024, I had people coming to me. I don't have unrealistic expectations. I'll be happy with 30-35% compounding. I mean, and I said that is an unrealistic expectation. And what happens is that you have that kind of unrealistic expectation, and then you have 1 year of markets being sideways or not doing well or coming down for that matter, and you give up and you think abhi to disaster ho gaya. So matlab you just keep swinging from one side to the other. You have all these nice looking spreadsheets of compounding over 20 years. Looking back at a chart, you will say, yahan market gira tha, but I wouldn't have gotten out. I would have stayed, but you don't stay. SEBI data shows that the majority of mutual fund investors don't even stay 2 years in a scheme. So that's why I'm saying equity has to be money you don't need for at least 8 to 10 years, because equity is not predictable. Abhi Diwali time, you will see all these Diwali specials where people will be giving Sensex projection or Nifty projection, what happens in 1 year. You should go back and check what they've said in the last 10 years and what happened. I mean, this is a number I have never given either at New Sambat time or in January, because I thought this was an absurd number to give. And only 2 years ago, when I read Daniel Kahneman's Noise, I got the term for it, which was objective ignorance, which is not only things that you don't know about, but you cannot know about. So nobody has a crystal ball as to what happens in the market 1 year hence, 2 years hence. It is, when you talk of compounding, it is over a period of time. So there's also all this nonsense that you can borrow money and and if you have money, instead of paying off your loan, you should put it in the market because you will get a 12-13% compounding. Kisi ne leak ke nahi diya hai. There are whole periods of time when that doesn't happen. So the superpower is really to stay through the ups and downs. Doesn't mean that you stay in the same stocks, but you stay invested to the extent of your equity allocation, which should not be 100% of your money. And the markets can be very strange. I mean, from 1994 to 2003, there was a 9-year period where the Sensex went up and down and ended at the same level 9 years later. But after that, in 4.5 years, it went up 6 times. So ऐसा भी होता है. So this is the kind of volatility in equity markets. And as far as projections are concerned, very interestingly, Bloomberg, because in the US that data is there for a long time, what various companies have projected as the S&P 500 target, which is their index. So it is like companies, all that you've heard of, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, Citibank, HSBC, Goldman Sachs, what have they predicted and what happened? It has actually nothing to do with what happens to the S&P that year. So if they say it will go up by 5%, it might be minus 10%, it can be plus 20%, it can be just anywhere. So all that is complete nonsense to really look at 1 year projections. But yes, over a period of time, yes, you do get compounding, but you do not get 30% compounding. So that also you cannot say that I will continue to get 30% compounding. And in trying to do that, you actually increase the risk. And the only thing, sometimes people come to me and say, why are you so conservative? This was last year. So we are willing to take more risk to get more returns. I said, only thing certain with the more risk is more risk of losses. Higher return aapko koi likh ke nahi deta hai. This is, but unfortunately, as you mentioned at the beginning of this question, a lot of people whose whatever earnings or fees or whatever is tied up with just getting people excited and invested in their products will do this. So I see fund managers who till last year were saying equity is the only thing. Now if they are launching a gold fund, they'll be talking up gold. So that I'm a bit upset about mis-selling in financial services. So that's another topic altogether.
So do your colleagues at First Global say, Devina ma'am, why are you like this, why are you going and telling people a normal return si milega, why can't you hype things up a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, last year, one of my relationship managers came to me and said ki one of our, I think, a distribution partner or client, I forget which, was saying कि आपकी मैम को सुनना तो बहुत अच्छा लगता है पर वो तो मदर टेरेसा की तरह बात करती हैं, ऐसे थोड़ी चलता है. अभी स्मॉल कैप चल रहा है तो स्मॉल कैप फंड निकालो.
No, so therefore, if one is to follow all the advice in your book, if one pays attention to capital allocation, diversification, risk management, in today's India, given where inflation is, where interest rates are, where GDP growth is expected to be, what would you say should be a reasonable expectation over a 30-year horizon for annual compounding for somebody to achieve?
So the history shows 14-15% in that range. So your fund manager can add maybe 2-3 percent points to that. So maybe if the market return is 14, the fund manager can give you 17 or 18 or something like that. It's not likely to be 25 or 30 consistently. It will not be. So that's the range you should expect. But over a period of time, like 2010 to 20, the market gave returns of not even 9%. There was if you had put in 100 rupees at the beginning of 2010, in 10 years you would have got 230 utna fixed deposit mein bhi mil jata. Whereas 1980, if you had put in 100 rupees in 10 years, it became 700. So the variation is very large.
One of the things that has happened since COVID is that the acceleration of the shift from real assets to financial assets. I mean, Indians used to invest a lot in real estate, gold. Large parts of the country still do very substantively. But the acceleration towards financial assets has enormously grown. It used to be said that equity participation in India is just about 3% of the population. I think it's already 6+ now. A consequence of all of this is that there are a lot of new investors in the markets and a lot of first-time investors in the market who have actually only seen the last 5 or 6 years when the returns have been really, really good. And one of the things that they're very drawn to are the superstar investors, right? And one of the conceits of the financial media of which I'm a part is that, a lot of eyeballs are drawn towards the actions of superstar investors. Ramesh Damani's This Thing's Talk, Ashish Kacholia, multi-bagger, aisa karke. Now, one of the beautiful things in your book is that you talk about how the greatest investors in the world, from Warren Buffett to Ray Dalio or Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, how, you talk about how a lot of the imagery around them is not consistent with what they're doing if you study actually what they're doing. Could you discuss this a little bit?
Yeah, actually that's one of the longer chapters in my book, so there are many points to that, but still just 2 or 3 of those things. One is they may not be doing what you think they are doing. Whether it is Warren Buffett, whom you think that just buys and holds. So if you look at his actual data, he sells over 50% of what he buys in 6 months, 85% in 2 years. Or whether the performance itself is good. So if you look at Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's company, for 20 years it has been about the S&P level performer. So till last year it was lagging. I think now it's about at par. Another name in international markets is Ray Dalio, who's written a number of books also, but his performance has been pathetic. But that is one part, that whether they're doing what you think they're doing, whether they are successful in the first place. And with these bits and pieces of knowledge you get that in India so-and-so bought so much, that is anyway not the full picture. That person may be selling elsewhere, they might be doing something else, that apart. Fundamentally the question is wrong. So what are you saying? That so-and-so is very rich, through markets, what did they do, and let me replicate that strategy. That question is fundamentally flawed. The question you have to ask is that of all the people who followed this strategy, what happened to them? For example, if there's a very high risk strategy where every year 90% of the people get bankrupt, but the 10 who are left multiply their money 10 times. You play this game 5 times, there will be one person who has made out that 1 lakh into whatever 10,000 crores, but everybody else has gone bankrupt. But you are saying this guy made 10,000 crores, let me see what he did. And that's where you get trapped. So always the question itself doesn't start with all the people who are playing that strategy. So for example, Rakesh Jhunjhunwala is a well-known, or rather was a well-known Indian investor. And I remember one of his interviews, somebody asked him that you made all your money through trading. Why do you tell people not to trade? He said, I smoke, but I tell my children not to smoke. And just because, you know, मेरा वो लग गया और मैंने बना लिया पैसा doesn't mean that was a sensible strategy. And also, a strategy might have worked at a particular point in time in a particular market. In India, for example, in 80s and 90s, there were a lot of inefficiencies, even to the extent कि same share का price Bombay Stock Exchange or Delhi Stock Exchange में अलग होता था. So they were very simple arbitrage opportunities which no longer exist. So markets change, and the same kind of strategy may not work. In the US in 80s and 90s, a lot of consumer brands did well. So people think, okay, consumer brands will always do well, but that was only a particular market at a particular time. So that's the thing.
One of the important cognitive biases you discuss in the book is the survivorship bias, and it's prevalent everywhere, right? Like when people discuss mutual fund performances, it's all over the financial markets. But one story you use to illustrate this beautifully is the story of the statistician who showed that you have to measure it differently.
Yeah. Which might resonate with a lot of people here, because I'm sure there are a lot of army background or defense background people. So in the Second World War, that allies were looking at all the aircrafts coming back to base to see where to reinforce the aircraft after an aircraft has been struck by the enemy. And they said, okay, these are the areas where we see a lot of holes, and this is what we have to reinforce. But actually, a statistician by the name of Wald, he inverted the question, and he said, where are the aircraft not hit at all? Because that means that if they were hit there, they didn't come back to base. They actually were. So that was inverting the whole logic, that you are looking only at the survivors. You are looking only at the aircraft that have come back, and you're trying to make some logic out of that. But it is, you have to look at it the other way around. And that's exactly what I was talking about, even in the analogy I gave just now, that of all the people who did that strategy, you are only looking at the survivor who made a lot of money. But what happened to the rest? And that's always for example, in the US, they did a study where they found that small cap mutual funds had given more returns than the general diversified mutual funds. But once they looked at all the small cap mutual funds which had gone out of business or had to be merged, they found there was no excess return. So it was only because you were looking only at the survivors. So in everything in life, like if I give an example from the Indian market, people say, oh, if you had invested in HDFC Bank or Kotak Mahindra Bank, this much compounding you must have got. And I mean, HDFC Bank is still identified with us because we did a big buy report on it back in 1996. But that apart, I said, you've forgotten all the banks that went out of business. Times Bank, Global Trust Bank, Yes Bank went through such big problems, Centurion Bank, so many public sector banks. So you're looking only at the successes. So that's always our tendency, to look at the successes and the survivors. You don't start with everybody who started at that level and what happened to them.
Gold has, grown, I think 40+% this year alone, while the markets are at just flat, maybe 1%, or even over a 5-year horizon. Last 5 years, gold has now outperformed the markets. Should we all just listen to our mothers than market walas?
So I had said that Nani Radi galat nahi thi gold sona kharidne mein. But see, gold should be part of your asset allocation, but it should not be a very large part. It should not be like 25-30% of your asset. And the reason for that is that if you look in rupee terms, the gold chart looks fine. Prices upar hi jate gaye hain, but that is because it is a rupee depreciation chart. If you look at a dollar chart of gold, it is a very volatile asset. It is not a safe haven. Recently, I saw a headline that gold has had the biggest rally since 1979. So I said, let's go forward and see what happened after 1979. So gold made a high in 1980. And guess what? I mean, any guesses that 19 years data from 1980 to 1999, what kind of return did gold give? Gold was down 62% 19 years later. It was down, still down 62% after 19 years. It reached the 1980 high only in 2007. So after 27 years, it crossed that high. It made another high in 2012, then fell 40%. So actually, gold has been even more volatile than equity, contrary to everyone's impression that it is one safe haven. So we always, I mean, I'm a very data-driven person, so I always look at data. I don't like just taking the stories that are floating around if they're not float. And for that matter, I used to tell my analyst, if you can't tell me the derivation of a formula, don't use it, because then you don't understand the formula. If you cannot tell me the limitations of a model, don't use it. Then you don't know the assumptions behind it, and it will lead you astray. So always, I mean, as a general rule, when you read about anything, read a lot. I read a lot, not just about markets, but don't swallow anything whole. Think about it, test it, does it really hold? And only then use it.
One of the fascinating things about the history of financial markets are the human desire for higher returns or to beat the street and just get that little. It's so universal and so timeless that financial manias keep repeating. Ponzi schemes, I mean, no matter how many Madoffs have come and gone, there are still people in every corner of this country still doing some Ponzi scheme of the other, going away. In my home district in Kerala, there was a Ponzi scheme that got bust, and 600 crore rupees worth of money this guy managed to run away. It's a lot of money for a small North Kerala district, So therefore, why do we forget history? Why do manias recur? And are you of the view that crypto is a similar bubble?
So manias, there's a wonderful book called Short History of Financial Euphoria. I think it's some 120 pages by John Kenneth Galbraith, lovely books. And it talks about all the stages of a bubble. And often even just to give one point, that in a bubble, people think, humko nazar aa raha bubble hai, but I will get out before it peaks. But nobody ever manages to get out, including Sir Isaac Newton. His fortune was wiped out in the South Sea bubble, one of the famous bubbles in Britain. Actually, he sold his stock once, saying this is crazy, but then when it went up further, he bought again, and then he lost it all. And it wasn't as if that he was a scientist and he didn't know anything about money. He was I think they were called the master of the Royal Mint for decades. So he was very much a money man. But so as one of my articles I said, are you more of a genius than Newton? Because this is the kind of madness that gets us into that anything that is excess return is always a question mark. Nobody can give you guaranteed excess returns without you're taking a huge and outsized risk. So don't play fast and loose with your money. As I said, do the boring stuff. People say that you repeat the same advice. I said, like, the investing advice doesn't change every 2 weeks. It is what it is. And you spoke about crypto. So crypto, to my mind, it's not as if that it's not going to be a valid asset, but it can't be very high proportion of your asset allocation. In our global funds, we've held it at times, but to the extent of 2-3%, not crypto directly, but crypto-related assets. And it will be a long time before it can be used to price anything. Because, see, if you're buying a car, you can't price it in a currency which itself is going 20-30% every day. And in its limited history, Bitcoin, and this is something I'd written in some of my articles in 2021 on crypto, saying that this is even in its limited history, many times it has gone down 70 to 80%, and then again it went down like that. So that is it. But many of course, you know, even currencies, or actually you shouldn't call it currency, but whatever kind of crypto that was brought in even as a joke, that also went up. In between, those silly NFTs were doing things, which was of course a scam. That was not, Bitcoin maybe has some future.
I think we are running out of time, but if anybody has some questions, lots of questions, Mani is interested. Yes, sir.
This guy, I've got his name, Medallion Fund.
Uh-huh.
Jim Simon.
Yeah.
Am I remembering the name correctly?
Jim Simon.
Jim Simon, yes.
Correct. So, aren't we having any of those Medallion guys? I believe he was a mathematics professor before he was brought for investment, and then that's given 40% return.
So I mean, two parts to this. One is that he didn't actually give those that 40% return, in the sense there's no independent proof of that 40% return. This is all his private money. I've read the book on him also, which they didn't cooperate with or give data, but it's a good book to read. I mean, not to say that you should read that book, but that return that he claimed, the only time he ran a fund where public data was available, the performance was so disastrous it had to be shut down pretty quickly. So I don't even know what it was. But use of artificial intelligence and machine learning for investing is a different thing. That is something we do. In fact, our whole system we call is a human plus machine system. But that is not the kind of trading algo that he was using. His was like millions of transactions where you hope to be right 50.5% of the time, and you will make money. But what we use it for is something different, and that's because the investing field has changed. But we didn't get the time to get into what I mean by that. But you know, maybe we can chat afterwards or at the book signing. Yeah.
My name is Mahesh Sagar. Please advise senior citizens in investments in Prudential life insurance. Is it safe for that?
No, I would not like to talk about and that's a company name, so I don't even know what is the scheme.
All the banks are dealing with this life insurance policies.
So one basic principle is that insurance should be used only for insurance. So to the extent that you need to put in life insurance for your family, which you may not need to at retirement, because I mean the principle of life insurance is the loss of income of the bread earner. But otherwise, do not mix up insurance and investments. And many times when I talk of financial mis-selling, it is also your bank relationship manager who will sell you products which are completely unsuitable for you. It will also be mutual funds who will bring in thematic funds at the peak of the theme. In fact, the easiest way to find out which theme is peaking is when there are a number of thematic NFOs and new fund offerings from mutual funds, because they all cluster when that just before the fall of that theme.
Divine evening, ma'am.
Just last question here. Devina Mehta. Here.
Mehra.
Yes, here.
Important distinction, actually.
Yes, sorry. So from Mahesh Sagar, I'm K. Mahesh. My question to you is, what is the relationship between investment in the share market and India's economic growth story? Quite often what happens when the share market rises or falls, we say, oh, look, it has gone so high. The number of investors are so small.
Okay, since time is limited, let me just tell you that often equity markets and macroeconomic data or GDP can be completely disconnected, at least for a reasonable period of time. The biggest example being China. Chinese market made a high in 2007. After that, its GDP went up 6-7 times, and it still, did not take out its high. So it took it almost 17-18 years to cross that high, even though the GDP went up 7 times in between. So it can be as disconnected as that.
Thank you very much.